The story of Convoy PQ-18 begins not on the open ocean, but in the quiet harbors of Valfjord, Iceland, during the late summer of 1942. To the untrained eye, the anchorage looked peaceful. Merchant ships resting shoulder to shoulder, Royal Navy escorts standing watch. But among the crews, there was no mistaking the tension. They knew the truth. PQ-18 was being formed in the shadow of disaster. Just weeks earlier, its predecessor, Convoy PQ-17, had been torn apart in the Arctic, with dozens of ships lost to German U-boats, aircraft, and surface hunters. This time, the mission was the same: carry crucial war supplies to the Soviet Union, but the risk was higher, and no one was certain how many of them would return. The route to Murmansk had become one of the most dangerous in the world. The Germans controlled much of Norway's coastline, allowing them to launch reconnaissance aircraft, long-range bombers, and Wolf-Pack submarines directly into the convoy's path. Every ship that sailed into the Arctic would be under constant surveillance, tracked from the moment it crossed into enemy airspace. This was not merely a supply run, it was a gauntlet. PQ-18 consisted of 40 merchant vessels loaded with tanks, aircraft, ammunition, food, fuel, and machinery, supplies urgently needed by the Soviet Red Army as the German Wehrmacht pressed deeper towards Stalingrad. Escorting them were destroyers, corvettes, trawlers, and a crucial addition, the escort carrier HMS Avenger, whose aircraft would provide limited fighter cover against air attack. The convoy also included the cruiser HMS Scylla and the destroyers of the 1st and 20th Escort Groups, experienced men who understood the Arctic War better than most. But experience came with scars. Sailors whispered about PQ-17 whenever spirits fell quiet. They remembered the sight of burning ships, the oil-slicked sea, the lifeboats that never reached shore. Some of the men now gathering aboard PQ-18 had survived that horror and were returning to the same route. They did not speak of bravery. They spoke of duty. The conditions aboard the ships were grim even before departure. The Arctic environment punished everything: metal, machinery, and morale. Temperatures could plunge below freezing even in September. Ice formed on deck rails, weapons jammed, and frostbite was a constant threat. Yet the convoy could not afford to delay. The Soviet forces were struggling to hold Stalingrad. Every day mattered. In one surviving diary from an officer aboard the merchant ship Empire Beaumont, a simple line captures the mood: "We sail knowing full well that to be seen is to be hunted." Commanders studied maps covered in penciled arrows marking potential U-boat patrol lines. Aviators aboard Avenger reviewed scramble procedures again and again. Anti-aircraft crews drilled on their guns despite numb hands and bitter winds. The convoy had to move as one, slow, steady, protected, but even the most disciplined formation could be disrupted by weather, attack, or fear. The British Admiralty believed that PQ-18 could succeed where PQ-17 had failed by maintaining cohesion at all costs. No scattering of ships, no abandonment of merchant vessels, no panic. Orders were explicit. And this time, the convoy would fight back, hard. Avenger's Sea Hurricane fighters were prepared to duel German reconnaissance planes in the frozen sky. The escorts would hunt U-boats relentlessly. The convoy would not break. Yet beneath the confident strategies and revised procedures, silence lingered. Many aboard felt a pressure they dared not speak aloud. If PQ-18 failed, the Arctic route might be abandoned entirely. And if the Arctic route fell, the Soviets might be left without essential supplies at their darkest hour. One petty officer later wrote, "We were told the world depended on us." It did not feel heroic. It felt heavy. On September 2, 1942, just before departure, a brief moment of stillness settled over the harbor. Sailors leaned on railings, staring into the gray horizon. Some murmured prayers. Others smoked quietly, hands shaking slightly in the cold. Officers paced. Engines rumbled to life. The order was given. One by one, the ships began to move, slowly, deliberately, into the Denmark Strait and the open Arctic beyond. The formation tightened, escorts taking up their positions like sentinels. The sea ahead was vast, cold, and merciless. The convoy would soon vanish into it, leaving behind only radio silence and worry. What they could not know, what no one could know, was that somewhere along their path, several of these ships would disappear without clear explanation. Lost to fog, ice, attack, miscommunication, or something else entirely, records remain unclear. The Arctic had swallowed many before. Now it waited for PQ-18. The convoy crossed the Arctic Circle under a sky the color of steel, where the horizon blurred into the sea and every sound seemed sharpened by the cold. By the second day, the escorts reported that German reconnaissance aircraft, likely Blome and Voss BV-138 flying boats, were already shadowing them from high altitude. The men didn't need binoculars to know they were being watched. The drones of engines overhead were enough to tighten every stomach on every deck. Once spotted, the convoy's position was no longer a secret. The hunt had begun. The Arctic route was unlike any other in the war. There were no ports to seek refuge in, no friendly coastlines to run toward. The sea lanes were bordered by pack ice and silence. If a ship fell behind, it became its own world, alone, exposed, easy prey. PQ-18 moved in a tight formation, shepherded by destroyers like HMS Onslow and HMS Obedient, while trawlers and corvettes fanned out to listen for submarine engines beneath the waves. Below the surface, German U-boat wolfpacks were waiting in long, calculated lines. U-255, U-408, U-589, names known to Allied intelligence, had been positioned weeks in advance. Their commanders didn't need to find the convoy, the reconnaissance planes did it for them. And once shadowed, the convoy's survival became a matter of endurance, discipline, and luck. Life aboard was harsh in ways few could have prepared for. Icy spray coated the decks in frozen layers that needed to be chipped away constantly to prevent the ship from becoming top-heavy and capsizing. Men worked with numb fingers and faces wrapped in wool, breath turning to frost on their mustaches. Sleep came in short, fractured intervals, punctuated by alarms and the restless thrum of engines. The cold did not simply bite, it settled into bones. One gunner aboard the British merchant ship Fjordheim recalled, "The cold made the steel ring. Every strike of the chisel felt like it was cutting through your skin." The escort sonar men spent hours listening for the faint, unnatural echoes of submarine hulls. Sometimes they convinced themselves they heard something, sometimes they were right. The problem was distinguishing real threats from phantom ones in an environment where ice flows, temperature shifts, and underwater ridges created deceptive signals. A false alarm meant wasted depth charges. A missed one could cost an entire ship. Above, tension built in the skies as well. The pilots aboard the escort carrier HMS Avenger knew that their aircraft, the Sea Hurricane, was rugged yet underpowered for the bitter Arctic air. Engines struggled to warm. Oil congealed. Takeoff runs were short, and the rolling deck made every launch a gamble. Yet these fighters were the convoy's only shield against the Luftwaffe's long-range torpedo bombers operating from Norwegian airfields. On the afternoon of September 10th, the convoy encountered something both expected and unsettling: silence. No aircraft shadows. No sonar contacts. No attacks. Just the endless white horizon and the low growl of engines. Crews knew what silence meant. It was the tightening of the noose. Some wrote letters during those hours, short, practical messages, often folded and stored in coat pockets rather than entrusted to the mail. "If this reaches someone, I hope you'll understand we did what we must." Officers gathered on compass platforms, studying formations through binoculars, knowing full well the Germans were studying them too. The convoy's speed was slow, around 8 knots. Just fast enough to move. Just slow enough to be vulnerable. At twilight, the cold deepened, and the sky took on the faintest hint of green from the northern lights. Beautiful, if not for the knowledge that silhouettes against the sky made perfect targets. The suspense was relentless, like the tightening of a bowstring. Every man understood that the first real attack could come at any time. They only needed one spark, one submarine sighting, one radio signal, to trigger the first coordinated strike. And when that strike came, it would come hard. For now, the convoy sailed on, engines beating a steady rhythm into the frozen sea, surrounded by dangers they could hear but not yet see. The stillness would not last. The stillness shattered on September 12, 1942. Just after midday, the lookout aboard HMS Avenger spotted distant specks against the clouded horizon, specks that moved in formation. Moments later, the alarm rang across the convoy. Luftwaffe aircraft were inbound. The crews had known this moment was inevitable, but knowing did nothing to slow the pounding of their hearts. The German attack had begun. These were Heinkel He-111 torpedo bombers and Junkers Ju-88 dive bombers, operating from bases near Banak and Bardufoss in occupied Norway. Their objective was simple and devastating: cripple the convoy, sink merchant ships, and sever the supply lifeline to the Soviet front. They flew low and fast across the water, using the gray sky to mask their approach. For a moment, the Arctic seemed to tremble with the roar of engines. On Avenger's flight deck, ground crews scrambled to get the Sea Hurricanes airborne. The freezing wind howled across the ship as the deck bucked in the swell. Launching fighters in these waters was already perilous. Launching them under fire bordered on the impossible. Yet pilot after pilot slammed their throttles forward, wheels lifting into the frigid air, climbing into combat. The sky above the convoy became a chaotic tangle of tracer fire and turning aircraft. The Sea Hurricanes, outnumbered and often outperformed, nonetheless charged headlong into the enemy formations. Their task was not to win the engagement, only to disrupt it, break up the bombers, force them to scatter, and reduce the number of torpedoes launched. Down at sea level, escorts opened fire with every available gun. The destroyer HMS Ashanti laid down dense anti-aircraft barrages, her guns firing so rapidly that barrels grew red-hot. Merchant ships joined in with Oerlikons and Lewis guns mounted wherever space had allowed. The air filled with smoke and the harsh scream of engines diving. One gunner aboard the merchant ship Oregonian described the scene in his diary. It was as if the sky caught fire. You couldn't tell what was snow, what was smoke, or what was shrapnel. We just kept firing. A Heinkel broke through the defensive wall and released its torpedo. It streaked across the waves, leaving a pale wake behind. The merchant tanker Aldersdale tried to maneuver, but tankers are not built for agility. Moments later, a plume of water and fire erupted from her hull. She began to list almost immediately. Escort destroyers attempted to pull alongside to rescue her crew, but the air battle made it nearly impossible. Still, the convoy held formation. That alone marked a difference from the tragic fate of PQ-17. No ship scattered. No vessel was abandoned. The escorts shielded the merchants, and the fighters shielded the escorts. Every man aboard understood the lesson carved into their memories from earlier convoys: unity was survival. The attacks continued in waves throughout the afternoon and into the evening. Each time, German aircraft regrouped, rearmed, and returned. Each time, the convoy raised smoke screens, adjusted bearing, and prepared its guns. The strain on the men was tremendous. Adrenaline could only carry them so far. Exhaustion crept in like frost. Yet amid the brutality, there were also small, human acts. A signalman aboard HMS Scylla was seen handing a cup of hot sweetened tea to an anti-aircraft gunner during a brief lull, both men too tired to speak. A Soviet liaison aboard Avenger quietly murmured a prayer in Russian over the wounded. By nightfall, the German aircraft had withdrawn, but the damage was done. Several merchant ships were gone, burned, or sunk beneath the waves. Survivors were scattered among the escorts, shivering, oil-soaked, and silent. The Sea Hurricanes returned to Avenger, many shot full of holes, some landing on the first try only by sheer force of will. The convoy had survived the first coordinated strike, but barely. One captain wrote that night, "We held the line today. I am not sure we can hold it again tomorrow." The men tried to rest, knowing more attacks would come, and knowing that the deeper mystery of the Arctic was still ahead of them. For in the days to come, ships would vanish not to bombs or torpedoes, but into something more uncertain, more silent, and more final. The fog was waiting. The morning of September 14th began with an eerie calm that felt almost unnatural after the chaos of the battles that came before. The sea lay still beneath a pale, muted sky. Engines hummed in steady rhythm, and for the first time in days, no one saw aircraft or submarine wakes. But the Arctic has a way of hiding danger in silence. As the convoy advanced, a thick, rolling fog began to form, not in scattered patches, but as a wall. Within an hour, visibility dropped to mere yards. Convoys rely on cohesion. Without sightlines, radio silence becomes a prison. The escorts tried to maintain formation through signal lamps and horn blasts, but sound was swallowed by the fog. Ships that had been no more than a few cables apart now vanished behind curtains of mist. The convoy slowed, compressing dangerously. Navigation became a test not of charts or equipment, but of instinct. The fog offered no comfort. Everyone knew that U-boats thrived in it. Sonar operators strained to detect engine noise beneath the freezing water, but thermal layers and drifting ice flows distorted the echoes. The escorts launched depth charges in measured patterns, not at confirmed contacts, but to deter unseen shadows. Each detonation sent tremors through the sea, but no one could say whether they hit anything at all. It was during this suppression, amid confusion and fractured communication, that the first ship disappeared. The merchant vessel Empire Stevenson had been positioned on the convoy's port column. She was carrying ammunition and aircraft parts. Her lookouts reported the glow of a flare off her starboard bow, perhaps a distress signal from another ship. She altered course slightly, just 3 degrees. But in a convoy, 3 degrees is enough to drift into isolation. And in fog, isolation is final. Minutes later, she was simply gone. No explosion. No radio call. No debris. The escorts searched by bearing, sweeping their arcs through the fog. They found nothing. A sailor aboard the destroyer HMS Onslow recorded his thoughts. The White swallowed her. No fire, no smoke, just absence. The remark was brief and telling. The Admiralty would later attribute the loss to a combination of poor visibility, broken station keeping, and possible torpedo attack. But no U-boat ever claimed her. No distress call was ever intercepted. German records, examined long after the war, list no engagement in that sector at that time. In the hours that followed, the fog deepened. Another ship, the Arlington Court, drifted off bearing by attempting to avoid ice flows reported dead ahead. She faded from view just as Empire Stevenson had. When the fog finally lifted the next day, she too was absent, leaving only oil streaks and a single overturned lifeboat, its oars stowed rather than deployed. A detail so minor, yet haunting in its implication. Some survivors later claimed, quietly, reluctantly, that they heard faint whistle signals in the distance, as if ships were calling to one another from the mist. Others swore they saw the shape of a vessel drifting without power. None of these reports were ever confirmed. The convoy regrouped as best it could, but morale had taken a new kind of blow. Combat they could face. Bombers they could see. U-boats they could fight. But the fog offered no enemy, only loss. One officer aboard HMS Scylla remarked in his log, "I understand a sinking. I do not understand a vanishing." The men continued forward in silence, the weight of the unknown pressing heavier than any shellfire. They had already endured cold, exhaustion, and assault, but now they confronted something more insidious, the fear that even vigilance could fail. Ahead lay Murmansk, but also the risk of more disappearances, more unanswered questions, and the growing sense that the Arctic took what it wished and left no trace. And the greatest test of the convoy was still to come. When PQ-18 finally approached the approaches to the Kola Inlet, the crews were exhausted beyond measure. Their faces were windburned and hollow, their uniforms stiff with salt and frost, and the sounds of engines and alarms seemed to echo inside them even when the world outside fell silent. But they had made it to the threshold of Murmansk, a place just as dangerous as the ocean behind them. The Germans knew this final stretch was narrow, predictable, and unforgiving. It was here that convoys were often struck hardest. Soviet patrol craft and harbor tugs appeared first, moving through gray-green water that smelled of coal smoke and iron. The shoreline rose in harsh, rocky slopes, dotted with anti-aircraft batteries and camouflaged supply depots. Murmansk was one of the few Soviet ports that remained ice-free year-round, which made it indispensable, and one of the most heavily bombed cities in the world. The journey was not over. It had simply changed form. As the convoy entered the inlet, German aircraft launched another series of attacks, striking from the direction of the tundra. The escorts responded with practiced readiness. HMS Milne and Martin sprinted ahead to create a defensive screen, firing predictive bursts at the approaching bombers. The Soviet shore batteries joined the defense, filling the sky with tracer patterns so thick they resembled glowing latticework. The combined fire was enough to disrupt the attack. Several bombs landed close, but none struck home. Still, every man kept his eyes fixed on the shoreline, searching for anything that might resemble a missing ship. They knew Empire Stevenson and Arlington Court were gone. So were others. Some had been confirmed sunk. Some had simply never reappeared. But the work was not done. The merchant ships offloaded in shifts, cargo nets rising and falling in steady mechanical rhythm, delivering tanks, crates of ammunition, spare aircraft parts, emergency rations, and fuel. Soviet dockworkers moved with quiet urgency. They knew where this cargo was going. Much of it would be sent directly south, towards Stalingrad, where the Red Army was clinging to the city's rubble. British and Soviet officers gathered briefly in concrete bunkers to exchange reports. The tone was restrained. Gratitude, certainly, but weighted with fatigue and the blunt acknowledgement of losses. The Soviets praised the courage of the crews. British officers noted that the cargo had arrived in time to make a difference. But privately, in sealed reports destined for London, there were criticisms. The Admiralty later wrote, "Coordination continues to suffer under pressure of environmental and operational interference." A careful phrase, meaning simply, they did what they could, but the ice, fog, and enemy pressure pushed every system to its limits. Among the crews, the emotions were more complex. Relief, yes. Pride, perhaps. But also the quiet absence of those who were not at the dock to see the unloading finished. The men avoided certain topics at the mess tables. They stared at the empty bunks in their quarters. They did not speak the names of the vanished ships. One British engineer aboard the Empire Beaumont wrote home after arrival, "We reached Murmansk with our lives and our cargo. It should feel like victory. It doesn't." Yet history would record PQ-18 as a success. Enough supplies had reached the Soviets to maintain pressure on the German offensive. Enough ships had survived to justify further Arctic convoys. Enough courage had been shown to mark PQ-18 as a turning point, in tactics, in resolve, in the understanding that the Arctic route could not be abandoned. But for the sailors, success did not erase the unexplained. Some believed the missing ships were torpedoed unseen. Others thought they broke apart in the ice. Some held to the quiet, unspoken belief that confusion and fear in fog had caused fatal navigational errors. None of these explanations were fully satisfying. The ships were simply gone. And in the years ahead, when researchers tried to uncover their final moments, they would find something unsettling. The records did not match. The logs disagreed. The reports were incomplete. The Arctic had offered no answers, only memory. And memory fades. But the mystery remained. Years passed before anyone attempted to revisit the unanswered questions of Convoy PQ-18. In the immediate aftermath of the war, the world was focused on rebuilding, on returning soldiers home, on healing. The Arctic convoys received recognition, medals were awarded, speeches were made, and ceremonies were held. But the losses of PQ-18, particularly the unexplained disappearances in the fog, remained largely unspoken. The men who survived rarely volunteered their stories. And when they did, their voices carried something heavy, something unfinished. It was not until the 1960s that naval historians and archivists began to examine the PQ convoys more closely. Britain had released some wartime records under the 50-year disclosure schedule, while Soviet archives began, very cautiously, to allow limited access to foreign researchers. A team of analysts compared convoy positions, radio logs, damage reports, and German U-boat activity maps. Their intent was simple: to reconstruct the convoy's route and identify the most likely causes of the missing ship's fate. The results were perplexing. The Empire Stevenson had disappeared in an area where no U-boat reported engagement. German Kriegsmarine logs were meticulous, submarine commanders were rewarded for confirmed kills, and falsifying tonnage was heavily punished. Not a single captain claimed the sinking. Soviet submarine activity did not extend to that sector at that time, and there were no recorded mines in the vicinity. The Arlington court, too, showed inconsistencies. Her overturned lifeboat, found with the oars stowed rather than deployed, suggested that she had not been abandoned in haste. Abandonment drills aboard Arctic convoys were drilled to instinct. Oars would have been shipped immediately if men had boarded. That detail implied either an extremely rapid catastrophic event, or no evacuation at all. In the 1980s and 90s, oceanographers conducted limited sonar surveys along routes used by the Arctic convoys. They found wreckage, ships from PQ-17 and PQ-13 resting in deep water, but nothing conclusively linked to the PQ-18 losses. The seabed in those regions is fractured, uneven, and vast. Any number of ships could lie beyond the range of even the most modern survey tools. And so the speculation continued. Some researchers suggested navigation errors caused by magnetic interference near the Arctic Circle. Compasses in that region are notoriously unreliable, especially under stress. Others argued the ships may have collided with ice fields or become trapped in shifting pack ice that later refroze, dragging them below. A few believed they may have drifted into sectors of German aerial patrol and been sunk in engagements that went unlogged or unobserved. But among sailors, those who had lived it, none of these explanations felt complete. There remained the lingering memory of the fog. A silent, choking fog that swallows distance, sound, and light. A fog where signals were lost, bearings failed, and men could not even see their own ship's bow. A fog that left only absence behind. One survivor, interviewed in 1991, said quietly, "We heard whistles that night. Not ours. Not distress whistles. Just calling. I cannot explain it. I do not try to." His interviewer noted that his hands trembled when he spoke, even after 50 years. Today, historians remember Convoy PQ-18 as both a hard-fought success and a sobering reminder of the cost of survival. It proved that the Arctic supply route could hold. It delivered supplies that helped shape the outcome at Stalingrad. It showcased courage in the face of relentless attack. But it also left questions that no archive, no logbook, and no veteran testimony can fully answer. Some ships were sunk. Some ships were burned. Some ships returned home. And some ships simply vanished into the Arctic, without witness, without record, without trace. Their names remain on memorial walls, carved in stone and remembered in ceremony. But the ocean that holds them gives up nothing. The Arctic keeps its secrets, and this was one of them.